Welcome to the Product Design Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Coelen, founder of UX Cabin, where we create world-class web and mobile apps. I'm excited to bring you a behind-the-scenes look into the lives of some of the most interesting and talented people in product design. We'll get strategic advice on how they got to where they are today and things they wish they would have known earlier in their career.
Hey, welcome to the Product Design Podcast. Today we have Nathalie Stratton with us. She is the co-founder and head of product design and engineering at Hearth. Nathalie, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, why don't you just give us a little overview of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, amazing. So my name is Nathalie, and as Seth said, I lead our product design and engineering teams at Hearth Display. My background is purely in product design, although I did go to school for architecture, and so have, made my way into the product world. Now I design software and build software, but also, physical things in actual real space.
Awesome. How did you know that you wanted to go into architecture in the first place?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, I think from the very beginning of my life, I've always been a builder. And I think I just had some very powerful women in my life that were in the architectural world when it was very male dominated. And so I kind of got to experience just like what it was like to build something from scratch. So it was definitely through like seeing other people in my life that were doing it that kind of brought me into the space. And when I actually went to get my master's in architecture is when I really started to explore how the physical and digital space kind of went together, like in our generation. Like I think we've gotten to a point, in our generation where you can't really have one without the other. And so I think that actually drew me to writing my entire thesis on how we experience space through the digital. And that's kind of how both, enjoyed architecture, but then also like started making the transition into product design.
So you got down quite a bit down the road in architecture, and then kind of what came up to let you know that you wanted to shift a little bit more towards into product design?
Yeah, that's great. I think there were, multiple things. I think architecture in itself is somewhat of an archaic industry. Like while it is, very beautiful to study and like the things that you learn in terms of like problem solving and design are actually very powerful. I think in itself as an industry doesn't really allow like the flexibility that like other design industries do. And so I think, I'm lucky that while it was like still someone late in schooling, it was still very, very early on in my career that I think in terms of challenges and problem solving and more like business problem solving, product design really actually allowed me to dive into like, bigger issues than myself. So, the way that companies use design to connect with the end user just seemed to me to have a lot more impact than architecture itself. Because at that time, when you think about someone experiencing a space, unless you're designing like a museum or something, if you're just generally designing a home, not that many people get to experience that. But if you're actually designing a digital or a physical product, a digital product can get into millions of people's hands. And so I think to me, just like that level of impact, like really drew me over to that side.
Very interesting. So it's one thing to want to get into a different industry or a different space. It's a whole nother thing to make the right connections, have the right opportunity to actually start doing some of that. So how did you go from architecture to wanting to get into product design to actually like cutting your teeth on an actual product design company or product or process?
Yeah, that's great. So after, when I realized that I wanted to jump into product design from the architecture world, I actually found a design role, like a physical design role at a property tech company. It was I guess probably now, it was like a few years ago, but it was just a prop tech company that was focused on both like the digital and physical aspects of space. And so when I started there, I was like at the beginning, predominantly like doing drawings for like office space to rent out. And within that, I actually started doing some both like digital design in terms of like 3D renderings and, 3D models. And then basically using those both to talk to potential clients, to really like give them an example of like, oh, this is what your space could actually look like. And then from there, like as I worked there a little bit longer, I realized that I was like, oh, we can actually productize this thing that we're building because we're building, in offices. There definitely are, things that you can use and reuse and think about it as a kit of parts. So you're always going to need, conference rooms. You're always going to need certain types of furniture, that kind of thing. And so over time, I realized that I was like, oh, we could actually come up with an app that allows people to basically kind of design their own office space based on a kit of parts that we give them. So at that point, it's kind of where I started like unofficially really getting into the digital design world from the physical design. And it was basically like coming up with these 3D models and being like, okay, within like the configuration of what this space looks like, here is what, this potential client, this potential customer can actually fit. How do we let them have the flexibility to choose how they want to build? It almost seems like it was a little bit like The Sims, like just allowing people like dictate what they wanted in their space instead of like, them being like, hey, I think I need this. Like, can you go back and do this drawing and bring it back and present it to me? So it really started from trying to connect the two and trying to put like this particular product in the hands of our customers instead of like being like a client services type of experience.
Cool. So it sounds like you kind of got in on the job with like your skills and degree that you originally had and kind of a little bit was able to shift into doing product design work and UX type of things while you were in that role.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I think I was pretty determined. I think I started kind of exploring the idea and I both heard, and honestly, this might be, a few of your listeners' experience as well, that it's like there are actually a lot of architects that go into the product design world.
Yeah.
Because I do think it's like the perfect training in terms of like problem solving and like the tools that we learn to use, that kind of stuff. And so I think I was pretty determined to make that transition anyway. And so it was like, how can I, within the context that I was in, how could I basically start telling a story about myself that I was already a product designer? And so even like with those projects, I think I was already I'd done like, the research that you like listen to podcasts, you read. I like reached out to people in my network that were product designers and asked them like, hey, what is your job? What do you do? And so then, because I was so determined, I was like, oh, I'm like going to start creating a narrative that I'm already doing this job, even though like my title might not necessarily reflect it.
I think that's amazing. And there's so many jobs out there that are tangent of product design, or even product design is done in-house that you can kind of get your hands dirty with. Like if you're at a marketing company and you're maybe on the account side, or you're doing graphic design, or you're doing project management, like all of these things touch different aspects of product design. And there's a lot of opportunity for you to get your hands in the process of that if you want to, and if you want to be proactive about that, which I think is really cool. And it's not like you have to go, quit your job, find something else. It's like you can get a lot of experience and learn a lot, even just by proxy, by UX designers or product designers around your department.
Yeah, exactly. Like it really is like about understanding what it is that a product designer does, or getting some sort of understanding and then using what your skills are. And yeah, like I think I mentioned like telling that narrative around yourself.
Yeah. The other point I wanted to bring up is like most people feel as though they can't call themselves something, or are really shy about saying this is what I want to do, or this is what I am doing. And, imposter syndrome, low self-esteem, whatever you want to call it. But putting a deliberate narrative around yourself, I think is like a really, really powerful like psychological hack for you, and a way that you want people to understand you too. So if you can muster up the confidence, I think that's the number one thing that you can do if you want to transition to more traditional product design or UX design role.
Exactly. Like you really just have to start by like, okay, I already see myself doing it. I'm determined to do it. So if I can believe it for myself, then it's naturally going to convince the people around me. And then, if you're interviewing or if you're putting a portfolio together or editing your resume, if you already are believing that about yourself, it's going to be so much easier to talk.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know if you had to do this ever, but just getting comfortable with telling the story through interviews or really low stakes practice. Because it's maybe I don't want to declare this to the whole world on LinkedIn, right? Or maybe I want to just test it out. There's really low risk ways that you can practice this and hone your approach and your storytelling until you're ready to, declare it in a more formal sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely started surrounding myself with people that had and knew the vocabulary of product and product design. Because I think that definitely is part of the battle, is really learning to speak the language, because really the skills, at least from where I was coming from, are super transferable. It really was just, oh, I used to do this thing in my last job, but in a product and product design world, that's what this is called.
Yeah.
And so then really surrounding yourself with people that are giving you the vocabulary to talk about your experiences, in the product and product design language.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you feel like it was just something that you needed to learn by osmosis and just being around it enough? Or was there a cheat sheet or resources that you looked at that were kind of just oh, this makes sense. I just, correlate these terms together now.
Totally. That's such a good point. Yeah, I definitely immediately reached out to friends in my community, and I was like, who do you know that's a product designer? Are they, willing to sit down and have a coffee with me, either to tell me about how they got into their career? Because there were definitely a few that were again, either architects in their previous life or, graphic designers, or maybe even something drastically different. And so it was who do I know that, can actually help me have those conversations? But then the other thing of it too is I just started reading a ton. I would go on Medium and I would, there's a couple things that, I think there's UX Collective, there's so many things that you can follow that will not only kind of guide you in terms of the basic fundamentals of things that you should know, but also just become really interesting guides to other things that you should do. I think I just started downloading a ton of apps, I would go on Product Hunt and I'd be oh, what is interesting here that I can download and kind of look at today, because I think sometimes it's very easy to sign on to something like Dribbble and be oh, wow, this is what product design is. It's this is the kind of design that I should be doing. But the reality is we are in the business of doing what is best for our users. And so a lot of times, the best thing that you can do is going to see what products are in market and what more experienced designers are putting out into the world. Because that is what you want to see. What are people using and what are people needing?
I think you hit on another really good point in that, it almost seems like you had to become a little bit obsessive about this. And I think people who want to get into product design are oh, this could be a cool thing. And, maybe I'll go through a UX boot camp and I'll just immediately get a job after that. But I think it's almost one of those things where it's you have to really enjoy it so much that it's what you read for fun in your free time. It's what you think about. It's what your, brain ideates on. And you're, like you said, looking on Product Hunt or reading guides or, doing all of these things that are almost in an obsessive manner that really you kind of need to do to push you above the fray and to get you above to the next level of actually being able to do these things.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, I don't even know who said this quote, but it's anything worth doing is not going to be easy. And so I think that's definitely one of those that it's just commitment to really getting into the world. And it might be commitment. I think some people do, quit their jobs and, just go jump into a boot camp or, luckily get a job. But for me, I didn't have that privilege to do that. I had to do it while I was still working. And so that meant that it was I was out for, 6 to 8 months in a very busy career already, where I was diving into things and I was experiencing different things and talking to people. You're right. It did have to be quite obsessive. But again, it really is just a I think it got to a point where I was like waiting to be offered like a product design role, but then I got offered this other really cool architecture job. And I think in that moment, I had to like make a decision of just like, am I committed to doing this? Like, am I committed to like making the change that I'm waiting on this role when I already have like, this offer here? And I think in that moment, I was like, you know what? Like, no matter what it takes, like, I'm going to do this. And so I like waited and ended up like jumping into this product design role as like my first ever.
Yeah. Maybe you tell us a little bit about like the career trajectory, history. So you kind of have this like architect job that you were able to do and learn product design things. And then what came after that?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. So yeah, that one was probably my first, and that first role, that was like the product design architecture role. That was probably like my last role in like the physical architecture space. Like immediately after that, it was all product design. And, I went from that into other startups, because I will say like, early stage startups like will be more likely to, I say take a risk, but like just be more open to taking on people that have like different backgrounds. So even just like that as like, a little bit of advice.
Yeah.
Like I think I jumped into a ton of startups. I took time doing my own projects, of just like, okay, first of all, I need to learn these tools. I already knew how to do all of like the Adobe stuff, but I was like, okay, what are like the particular tools that, the product world uses? So like the Figmas, the Sketches of the world, like I was like, I need to be good at this. And so I had to like assign myself like very simple projects of just like, okay, how can I both, copy what's out in the world, but then also solve my own problems. And at the same time, like finding kind of like a pseudo mentor of someone, that can be like, hey, you're already a product designer. I'm maybe a little embarrassed, like, don't make fun of me, but like, this is what I'm doing right now. Like, can I have your feedback? Like, I think that was like definitely part of it. And then, once I got a couple startups under my belt is, kind of where I ended up where I am today, where, now I lead product at my own company. But, it actually is like such a privilege to get to do this because we're a consumer startup. And so really design is such a crucial thing of what we're building.
Yeah. No, I think you said it completely right with startups being a little bit more willing or whatever to, give people a shot. I think part of that is just you have to move so fast in the startup. They don't have the luxury of, taking 6 weeks and multiple like HR interviews and department head interviews. It's just like, I got a good gut feeling about you. So let's roll.
Totally. Yeah. It's like that's like, honestly, early on for a Hearth, when we hired, it was like, is this person hungry? Like that is the number one thing. Like, do they care about the mission that we're building for? And are they hungry to learn, every single day?
Totally. Because I think you can like, I don't know, bigger, larger corporate companies, like they kind of have the luxury of like, we're going to wait 6 months for the perfect fit. And we're going to do, 11 interviews. And we want people to have this in their portfolio or their case study, when it's like a startup might just be like, yes, like we want people in, with experience in this industry, or we want people who are really hungry or, whatever the qualification is. And that's like, maybe it's a little bit more risky because they only have, X amount of runway, but it's like, it's a great way to get your foot in the door.
Exactly. And also a great way to grow, like I think also like startups will have different resources of like advisors and like people you can reach out to that will kind of help you skip over some of those hurdles. But it's true that even at larger companies, like there are times where like, larger companies will purposely hire more entry level or junior type, like fresh designers or fresh people, because they do have the resources to, like, say, for example, there's like one organization I worked on that like we did explicitly hire like younger, more junior level type designers because we already had like a very robust design team. So like we could invest in those people. So there's like a little bit of both, right? Like on the startup side, like, you do get to learn super quick and on the job. So it like definitely is for like specific type of person. But then, if you do happen to end up at like a larger organization that is like properly resourced, like you can also have like really good access to like brilliant designers. And people.
Yeah. I think a part of it is just like what your natural, proclivity might be towards. Like if if you want to have a lot of structure and, guardrails and, very specific lanes, generally speaking, like larger corporations, you're going to get more of that versus startup. It's like, if you kind of like wearing a bunch of different hats, solving different problems, don't mind doing something that's completely not in your job description for a week, like maybe that's more the route you should go and explore.
Totally. And it takes a lot of self-awareness, I will definitely say, which is totally okay. It's totally okay to like say like, actually, I'm more of like a big person, or actually like, yes, I'm like excited to like dive into like, a crazy rocket ship startup.
So throughout the jobs that you've worked, any like red flags of like, hey, if company says this, you should run the other way, or if company does this, you should, run for the hills?
Wow, that's great. That's a really great question. I feel like there's definitely been a time where when you hear, it's funny because, what I'm building now is very, very like family oriented. We're actually building like a product that is like tools for the family. But I think like in any organization I've worked on in the past where they're like, oh, we work as a family, like we're a family. Like if you hear that, I'm like, no, I work for you. Like I don't work. Like this isn't a family. Like a family doesn't, I don't know.
I 100% agree.
So that's definitely, I would say, is a red flag for sure.
Yeah. It's like when people say that, it's like, I want you to feel indebted to me and like you are a family member.
Yeah, no.
And it's kind of like that. At best, it's like we like each other and we hang out and we care about each other's personal lives. And at worst, it's like, I want you to sacrifice as if we are your family. Like, it's like, no, we are a team.
Yes.
Like, if I'm not pulling my weight, I would expect you to fire me like any other, normal team.
Yes.
And if you're not holding up your end of the bargain, then I'm going to switch teams. Like, this is not a family.
Exactly. And also that to me, if anything, it teaches me that it's like, leaders need to do a good job of like setting expectations, but also knowing when the expectations are too big. And so because then that kind of like avoids falling into the pitfalls of like overworking or like, blending work into like your personal life.
Right.
There are people that like love working a lot and great, you do that, but not everyone loves that. So definitely stay away when someone says we are a very happy family for sure.
Yeah, no, I think, and just like understanding the like terms that you're getting yourself into, because it's like, hey, this is a really cool opportunity. We're going to give you a lot of equity or shares, but we're going to expect you to work 80 hours per week. And that's just like the reality of the trade-off. Maybe that's a really good trade-off, right? Like,
yeah. And it might be if you're like first trying to learn like crazy, us talking about earlier, just like, oh, I actually want to like, I'm super hungry. I want to be super committed because I really want to grow and really want to learn, something that should take me a year to learn. I want to learn it in 6 months. It really is just like dependent on what you want.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Anything that you look back on your career thus far and you say like, I wish I would have done that differently, or if I would have changed things, I could have maybe shortcutted some efforts or anything like that?
Yeah, I think that is a really good question. What would I have shortcutted? I think there are definitely times when I think I would have gotten into the digital product world a lot earlier. I think just the way like, education is set up, like I wish I would have just had exposure to it, just like more knowledge on like, what can I do with the skills that I have? And I think I very much had to expose myself to them. Like I come from, a relatively small town and I really didn't get exposure to like the digital ecosystem until I was in New York City. And so I think if I really wish that I would have had that exposure earlier on. I think it would have, kind of flagged that my interests like went beyond like the physical space, that I actually wanted to have like real design impact globally. And again, I think I mentioned earlier, just like in like digital products can get into millions of people's hands. And I think that's super powerful. And I, wasn't really exposed to that and really wish that I would have been a lot earlier in my career.
Yeah.
In school, I
you
guess.
Feel like that's just something that like guidance counselors as a whole could like be better at, like just serving up different opportunities and things for like people to consider as they're going in, considering college and career and stuff like that?
hmm That's a great question. I think now I will say might be like a little bit different for, you know, younger generations now, but it's really just asking and like kind of, yeah, you're right. Like putting it on, guidance counselors or mentors, career mentors to be like, what can I actually do with this?
Right.
You know, like what can I expect after studying this or after, diving into this? And then even learning like I think we talk about like the future of work all the time these days, but it's like, what is it that I can study that I really care about that is good for my personality and allows me to do the things that I love? So if, you're going to be a people person, what kind of role can you do that like allows you to be with people all the time? But, like for me, I love huge challenges and problem solving. So like, what can I do in like in any space that will allow me to do that? Because that's what I find fulfilling.
Yeah. I think it's almost like in school, it's like you figure out what subjects you're good at, and then you're like, okay, pick a career based off of this. I think it goes a lot deeper into like, like you said, like maybe you like hanging out with people, maybe you like talking to people, maybe you don't like talking to people. And
Totally.
like what careers map to more so your personality, and then maybe secondarily like subject matter skill set, right? Like
exactly. Exactly. And that it's like, I love building cool things, but I don't want to talk to people. Then it's like, okay, go, do you want to code? Because you still get to build really cool things, but there's no expectation for you to like, be in front of users. Whereas like, if you're going to go be a product designer, it's like, it's going to be expected that you have like a deep set level of empathy, which means that you have to go to your users and talk to them, daily, if not weekly.
Yeah, totally. Thinking, about your career kind of broadly, do any specific high or lows stand out to you?
I'm going to say both lows and highs building a startup from scratch. I think that like I'm at this point in my career, like I've been building Hearth now since 2020. And I think that definitely is an absolute roller coaster ride, of just really wanting to build something that has like just big impact for families, but at the same time is like nothing, this has not existed before. And so I think in terms of career, like just doing something that has never been done before is always going to be like a huge challenge. So it has both its like lows and its highs, like when you actually like get to create something beautiful that people are using and people love, like that's the high. But then when it takes longer or, when you don't feel like you have the resources to do it, then that feels like low.
Well, why don't we get into a little bit about Hearth? So why don't you tell us kind of broadly what it is and how you got the idea to make it?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for asking that. So we are a company building modern technology to basically make the pain points of family management a lot easier and more equitable at home. So the point is like households of all kinds can like really focus on what really matters, which is making most of their time together. So what we're building right now is a centralized touchscreen that includes project management tools for people at home. So, we like to call it kind of like the replacement to the physical whiteboard, where you can use technology, leverage technology to see people's calendars, events, to-dos, like routines for, healthy habit building across families. And the reality is it's just to empower independence across the home. So that's really what we're building for families.
Cool. How did you get the idea that there was a need for this?
Yeah, absolutely. So me and my two co-founders both grew up in homes where we had two working parents. So, dad working, mom working. And yet at the same time, we like really saw like our moms as like the superheroes that were doing it all, that they were working, picking us up from school, coming home, like doing all the planning, all of the things. My dad would absolutely like jump in and help, but my mom was really doing like the project management aspect of it. So like really thinking ahead and then monitoring progress and like taking us to all the extracurriculars, making sure we had what we need for the extracurriculars. And so I think during 2020, like we saw like just such a that drastic shift of women dropping out of the workforce or, caring for kids at home while working simultaneously. And we realized that, families nowadays like really want to jump in and tackle that labor in the home together, but they just didn't have the tools needed. Like everything is like super archaic and like disaggregated, sticky notes and the whiteboard and the mobile apps. Like there was no center place to do that. And so, we kind of went out on a whim and we said, this is something that we really believe that software, with a physical component to it could really tackle.
And what did your early day research look like?
That is a great question. So it was definitely in the middle of COVID, all of us stuck at home. The first thing was, who do I know in my community that is a parent that, is also working, that is probably at home right now, that can, first tell me like how they organize at home. And so it was really just like pure user research at the beginning. So I actually like set up this, document of just like interview questions that all of it was just like very like discovery based. It was like, okay, we think that there's a problem and we think we know what the problem is. We have a little bit of a hunch of what the solution is. So really what I wanted to know is like, how are people organizing their household now? What are they using? What tools are they using? What is actually the pain point that they're going through? So I think I talked to about, 30 parents within the span of like a week or two, where I was like, tell me how you do this already. Are you using technology to try to solve this, or are you purely using analog tools? I mean, we were definitely getting a mix. And so that's very much how it started. Like, it was like, really just tell me what the problems are. Tell me how you're doing this right now. And then after that, we actually started coming up with some like wireframes and screens for our parents to react to. That, it was more of like, oh, imagine that you had something, in your home like this. What is your first response? Like really starting to gauge, it's like, is there space in the market for us to build this?
And what was your findings?
The findings that is, yes, there is definitely space in the market for this. And, that's even something that we've seen now. We did an Indiegogo campaign last July and, made over $600,000 and sold out our first inventory run. Because there's like such a need for this in homes.
Totally. I think it's really interesting that you decided to go with a physical component, because I think there's a lot of family planning tools and calendar and collaboration like platforms out there that are just app based. So Did you have any preconceived notions of what this might look like? And did that change at all during the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I would say was the most important part is that existing tools, let's say existing technology tools, like an app or something, excluded the majority of the family. So, say you have like a kid that's under 10 years old, like nowadays, like parents don't really want their kids to have phones that early. And so when you're using a mobile app, it really only allows like the parents to be involved. And so naturally what happens is that, then you have to bring in those analog tools for visibility. So a parent would be like, great, it's on my Google Calendar, but now I have to take what's on my Google Calendar and then write it out on this whiteboard every week so that my kids don't ask me 50 million times, like, hey, what's going on? What are we doing? When is grandma coming over? When's my soccer practice? And so, we quickly realized that it was like, oh, we need to include kids in this. We need to assume that they don't have cell phones, but that they want to be a part of the household planning, that they want visibility into what's going on, and that parents at the same time want their kids to be empowered.
And what are most people using these days? Is there a common thread of tools or not that came up?
Oh yeah. So definitely big into sticky notes and giant paper calendars. I think there was one point I talked to a family that had like an Amazon like tablet just stuck to the wall as like a way to like get their kids involved and like visibility, like chore charts, things like that you can print online, but nothing that was really leveraging technology.
So with Hearth, like obviously we've talked about scheduling. What other problems does it solve?
That's great. So, really like our mission overall is to put more women in the corner office. That's kind of what we want to say, that it's like at the end of the day, labor at home should be spread out across everyone that's a part of it. And, that can be kids, that can be parents, that can be, a babysitter. That can be, your mother or father-in-law that are coming in to jump in and help and do some of that caregiving. So, at the beginning, like while we do talk about family management, a lot of it does have to do with general caregiving. That if you provide visibility into generally invisible labor, so that kind of like mental load, the like thought process of like planning ahead and then making sure that, everyone is where they're supposed to be with the things that they're supposed to have for whatever that extracurricular or event is, that's kind of where it starts. But then it really goes into like, how do we allow kids to just helps them with like executive functioning? I don't know about you, but like, I didn't even know how to use a Google Calendar until I was in college, and now I'm kind of like, how do we, allow kids to have access to like that kind of executive functioning where they can visualize time, they can like visualize, thinking ahead a little bit.
That's really cool. So what have been some of the most challenging things about building this product?
I definitely think like I wish we could build it as fast as we build software. Definitely building both like a physical and a digital thing has its challenges. You have your like supply chain things that you run into, or, like with physical stuff, you really have to get it right on the first time. Whereas with software, you can iterate. That's part of like the beauty of software, that like you can throw something out into the world, then you can get the feedback and you can then iterate and change it. And maybe the design isn't working as intended, and you can measure very quickly. But with, something like hardware, something very physical, you have to do a lot of like pre-testing to make sure that you're building the right thing. So that's definitely something that like took a while for us, that we were just like, okay, great. We're going to do a couple prototypes. We're going to get a ton of feedback on there before we really commit to how this thing functions, what it looks like. We had to do a lot of forward thinking in terms of like the hardware features that we wanted to include, just to make sure that we were like, again, getting it right on the first time.
Ooh, so how do you pre-test things? That sounds really interesting and really expensive.
Yeah. Thankfully, it's not as expensive as it sounds, thankfully, but we definitely did a lot of prototyping. So I think there was one where we had our very first unit had just like a fake frame around it. Like I think we took just this like tablet off the wall. We like went to a frame shop and then just had them build a frame. And then we literally put the frame on top of the thing and then put it in front of people. And we're like, hey, like, what do you think? Like tell us your first response. So that's kind of how we did it. Like a lot of like imagery and like asking people questions and like physically putting it in people's homes and being like, what would you do with this? What do you think about the size? We did a lot of testing for sizing. Like we started, our product is quite big. It's, diagonally 27 inches. We did one where it was 32 inches. That was like, people were like, oh, no, that's too big. But then we did one that was 21 inches and, everyone was like, this is like kind of too small to go in my home. So we had to do like multiple prototypes that we try to keep as cheap as possible.
So what are all of the different like ways that you expect people to interact with and use the product? And maybe it's more open-ended where people can kind of make it their own. But what's kind of like, I guess, is your product more opinionated and it has certain things that you want the users to do? Or is it just kind of like, here's a bunch of tools you can use however you want?
So I would say it's definitely a mix. I think something that we are definitely very clear on is Hearth isn't there to parent your family. Like we're there to kind of be in the background and just like facilitate those like magical family moments that parents and families like want to have. And so, yes, there's, an aspect of like through our research, we like learned that there are like specific tools that parents require. So calendaring, for example, integration needs. So, our very first integration is with Google because a lot of families, use Google, whether at work or like for, planning or extracurriculars. Then the next is routines. Like parents really care about, I want to build a routine for my kid. Like I'm already doing this on like a piece of paper that I stick on a wall, but I want to be able to build like a flexible routine for my kids based on, whatever that season of life might be for them. That maybe they're, homeschooled or they're going to school and they have like a morning routine before they get out the door. And when they come home from school, they have their like evening routine before they go to bed. So I think it's like a very purpose-driven tool for this particular use case. We have so many different kinds of families. So we like want to make sure that it is flexible enough that families can also put their own spin on it.
Yeah.
So like, I think we're working on rewards at the moment. So it's like, oh, parents like to incentivize their kids in different ways, you know, as they build habits. Like some people will be like, oh, I'll take you out for ice cream. Other people will be like, oh, I'll give you money to like buy things you care about. So, you know, that's kind of where we want to leave like the flexibility, like really up to the families to decide.
You have kind of like a particular family makeup that you're targeting. So like, it sounds like parents with kids probably at the broadest level.
Yeah, that's it. You know, it is parents with kids. We have definitely had a lot of interest from couples or very giant families or even like homeschool teachers that are like, oh, I really want this to have like all my kids that I homeschool. But at the moment, we are focusing on families that parents 2 to 3 kids.
Maybe give us a little understanding of kind of like the team makeup as far as like the design disciplines and engineering disciplines that went into having to make this.
So, you know, because we are a consumer product and that, you know, design is like really one of the things that sets us apart. Our team is like heavily invested in product design and engineering. From the beginning, we have an amazing product designer who has both like an agency background and just branding and design, but also is like a very like product driven type of mind. And so she loves research. And so that's one of those things that's been super powerful that we can like design a bunch of stuff and then put it out in the world and test it. So it definitely is, how can we validate what we're building before we actually pass it off to the engineering team to build? So that's definitely like how our process works. So we want to make sure like from the get-go, we're as close to building the right thing as possible before it goes and we invest resources to bring it to life or to make it like very real. But then we also had, when it came to hardware, we actually worked with an industrial designer who like helped us design and like try out different things to make sure that we were building for all of the use cases, to make sure that we were building like what our parents expected to hang in their homes. We worked with mechanical engineers, of course, to like help us put, you know, the display itself together as a touch screen. And then with, you know, a firmware engineer that allow us to actually embed our software into this display. So it was definitely like a huge effort, probably a team of anywhere from like 6 to 12 people at any point to really bring this to life. And now in terms of like the software, it's like constantly like design, product and engineering, seeing like, how are people using this? We talk to our customers every day. Right now, we have over 100 people on our platform or with these units delivered in their homes. And so we're talking to them every day. For us, it's like, how quickly can we get to the dream thing that you're using every day? And so we're like really thankful that like our parents that are on the platform now are super vocal, very opinionated, like have amazing and thoughtful feedback.
What, from your perspective, do you think has been like the most valuable skill set that you've had that's helped you build this business?
Yeah, I think that I would say, might sound a little bit cheesy, but fearlessness. At the very beginning of this journey, people were like, what are you doing? You're building hardware and software? That's insane. And I think for us, like there was an aspect of it where like, but this needs to exist. You know, like no matter what we have to do, this needs to exist. And so kind of like really seeing the world as like, it can totally happen. Like you just need to ask the right questions, find the right resources, talk to the right people, and also just surround yourself with people that believe in you in general. And so here, like specifically, like I would just say like not being afraid to like try something.
Yeah. What's been the hardest thing about building this product?
Yeah. Hardest thing about building this is sometimes I just feel like we don't have enough people yet. I'm like, I wish that we had all of the people in the world to like move as fast as possible. Just like time. I think like the demand on this is so high. Like we really want to get thousands of these into family homes. And so I think just not being able to get to those thousands immediately like is quite difficult. And then I think just a more like challenge, I think what I find myself is I don't get to design as much anymore as I used to. I think now like my team is so talented that obviously I trust them to do it. So that's definitely one of those where I'm like, oh man, like I really love designing and I love building.
It's kind of hard to let that go. I'm sure. Totally. There's sometimes things where you're like, I wouldn't have done it that way, but am not the one making all of those decisions.
All the time. Like, I feel like now I'm like, hey guys, like this is, the data and here's like the problem that I'm seeing. You are the trusted expert in this. So like your recommendation, I'm going to trust that you vetted it. I'm going to trust that you were hired for this purpose. So, but yeah, there are definitely times where I'm like, I might have done something else, but it's not my job.
Yes, that's very tough. I kind of find myself in the same place sometimes where it's just like, yeah, that's not what I had in mind. But again, like, I'm not here to be designing this right now on this project. So I can give feedback, I can give thoughts and ideas. But at the end of the day, like,
exactly,
if you are achieving what the customer wants or what the client wants, then who am I to stand in the way of that? Any like advice you have for folks who are maybe considering building their own product or designing their own product versus just staying as an employee of someone else? Maybe you can give us a little pros and cons of each.
I definitely think the biggest thing is surround yourself with people that believe in you. My co-founders and I are like super lucky that we're doing this together. And definitely surround yourself with people that believe in you, and then also probably have different skills than you, because they're going to challenge you in really great ways. So if you like want to build a product from scratch, like that's kind of like the baseline. Like surround yourself with people that believe in you, who have complementary skills. And then the next thing I would say is really dig into the research. Like really dig in and find, like data points to the problem that you're solving. To be like, oh, this actually really is a problem that exists in the market, in the world. It's a design challenge that needs a solution. Because I think when that happens, it really becomes mission driven instead of just building for building's sake. And again, then on the other side, it's true that, if you do find that pain point, then you do have to spend a lot of time convincing people that the pain point exists, and so then, the layer to that is like also surround yourself with people that believe the pain point exists. Just because then again, it makes it more mission driven and it makes, just your own commitment. Like when it feels like a roller coaster ride of building something, like that mission is there and you can like really cling to that. I think never stop learning. Like, I feel like for me, I always am like, okay, I know 80% of this. Now it's time to move on and learn something else. Like, I think I catch myself wanting to be an expert in something and actually like, no, it's faster to get to that 80% and then either trust the experts to get it to 100 or, move on to like learn the next thing that will help you be more well-rounded.
Very cool. So yeah, I know you mentioned that you guys sometimes feel like you can't move fast enough. For anyone listening, is Hearth maybe considering hiring now or in the future?
Great question. So we are always hiring, especially this year. We're like really wanting to grow our team. So, if you're interested, like go over to our website, hearthdisplay.com, and to our careers page.
Nathalie, this has been a fantastic chat. I feel like I learned a lot and you've given a really cool perspective on a really new and innovative product. So I wanted to thank you for coming on and talking with us and let you have the last word.
Awesome. Yes. So, Seth, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. For anyone out there listening that is interested in Hearth Display, I mentioned earlier we did an amazing Indiegogo campaign and sold out last year. So we're actually opening pre-orders again in May. We currently have a wait list of 50,000 people. So we're offering listeners of UX Cabin the chance to skip the line.
Cool. Well, Nathalie, thank you again so much. And we'll look to talk again soon.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us today on the Product Design Podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation, be sure and go follow our guests. Let them know they did a great job and you learned a lot. More to come in the following weeks as we bring on new guests. Please hit that subscribe button so that you will get these podcasts and learn a ton about the product design community. Excited to see you next time. Thanks.